Hello and welcome to Watching the World 24/7 on NDTV. I am Vedant Agarwal. Let's quickly get you a wrap of all the big international headlines this morning. Sri Lanka President Dissannayake's NPP heads for a landslide win. Dissannayake's NPP gains massive lead in the snap polls. Protests on the sidelines of the APEC summit. Hundreds of protesters clash with the police in Lima. Donald Trump taps conspiracy theorists for the top health post. Trump picks vaccine skeptic RFK Jr. as the health secretary. With West Asia on edge and the Trump administration taking shape, well, reports suggest that Elon Musk has met Iran's UN envoy. Prime Minister Narendra Modi to embark on the crucial Africa and Latin America trip. He's set to begin his three-nation trip on Sunday. Our lead story in the World 24/7. Well, counting of votes in the Sri Lankan snap elections is underway as the new president, Anura Kumara Dissanayake, seeks to increase his party NPP's power in the parliament as well. Well, initial results show Dissanayake is headed for a landslide victory. According to the latest figures, NPP has managed to gain a massive lead with over 62% of votes. Well, former President Ranil Wickremesinghe, who received a major setback in the September polls, is currently in the third position with 17.3% votes. In fact, the polls came as the country recovers from the catastrophic financial crisis. In fact, the Marxist-leaning Dissanayake was elected in September, remember, but his National People's Power, NPP coalition, had just 3 of the parliament's 225 seats, prompting him to dissolve it and seek a fresh mandate. And the other big headline, well, US President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi have arrived in Lima to participate in the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum in Peru. They will be participating in the high-profile summit attended by over a dozen world leaders. But this as Peruvians protested on the streets on Thursday against the country's government as world leaders arrived in the country for the crucial Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum. At one point, in fact, a group of protesters hurled plastic bottles and water cannons at the police as well. In fact, police dispersed the protesters. NDTV's Samia Afsar, in fact, gets us a wrap of what happened ahead of the crucial summit.
As world leaders arrived in Peru for the Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation Forum, hundreds of Peruvians protested on the streets of downtown Lima, angered by the Peruvian government and its failure to tackle rising crime. Over 15,000 police and soldiers had been deployed, schools were shut, and public employees were ordered to work remotely as the government anticipated protests on the sideline of the summit. The anti-government protests are the latest in a series of street demonstrations and union strikes following a recent eruption of violent attacks and extortion that has paralyzed the Peruvian capital in recent weeks. Peruvian President Dina Boluarte has vowed that authorities would quickly respond to a recent wave of killings tied to criminal organizations, yet little progress has been made. This has sparked anger among protesters who marched to the site of the APEC summit in hopes of drawing global attention to their cause. President Boluarte, who took office after President Pedro Castillo was removed, is considered one of the least popular leaders in the world. Some protesters burned pictures of her and others held signs with photos of the 60 Peruvians, mostly civilians, who were killed during protest in December 2022, which started after Castillo was ousted. The protesters are still calling for justice for those killed by the police. As some protesters scuffled with riot police and burned the American and Chinese flags ahead of the arrival of US President Joe Biden and Chinese President Xi Jinping, Others said that they were not against Peru hosting the conference.
Nosotros no tenemos nada en contra de la PEC. Sería bueno que esa inversión que traigan sería bueno para el progreso de nuestro país, pero lamentablemente no vemos el progreso es mínimo y eso el pueblo está indignado.
As the APEC summit is underway, the streets of Lima remain a battleground for those demanding change, with protesters' voices echoing their frustration at a government they say has failed to deliver security and justice for the people. Samia Afsar for NDTV World.
And now the other big headline. Well, according to a new Human Rights Watch report, Israel has overseen the forced mass displacement of Palestinians in Gaza in a deliberate and systematic campaign that amounts to a war crime and a crime against humanity. The 154-page report published by the US-based advocacy group on Thursday details more than 13 months of widespread destruction in Gaza that, according to the UN, has seen the displacement of about 1.9 million Palestinians, more than 90% of the territory's population. So absolutely shocking there, the kind of war crime, as the Human Rights Watch report points out. Then let me go across to my colleague Mohammad Ghazali. Ghazali, in fact, you've reported on this from the ground as well, on the humanitarian crisis that has been unfolding in Gaza. And these figures in the, in the UN report don't really capture the essence of, the extent of the crisis on the ground. Children, women, all losing their lives, entire generations being wiped out.
See, Vedant, that entire strip, the Gaza strip, we have seen displacement of people for the last 1 year. Israel continues to announce those displacement or safe locations. People move from one location to another considering it safe. But in the last 1 year, there have been numerous instances where when people have moved to one location to another or have moved to a safe location as per the Israeli forces, they have yet again faced attacks there. And this has been going on for the last 1 year. This is relentless. And multiple human rights agencies have highlighted it. And even the UN report says the same. Now, the question is that whether the Western world will accept it or not, because there has been a concerted effort to discredit the HRW or the UNHR or multiple other human rights organizations which have been working in Gaza, which have been reporting and documenting evidences of war crimes, of human rights violations, and targeted killings of kids, women, and elderly. And there have been multiple doctors, medical practitioners, and agencies who are working in that strip and have documented on numerous occasions. But the US State Department continues to discredit it or doesn't even criticize Israel for what it has been going on in the Gaza Strip and now in Lebanon. We have heard that even US State Department, Mr. Antony Blinken, a couple of days ago had said that how they have given Israel a deadline to increase the aid into Gaza, and yet that deadline passed, and the State Department says that they have seen considerable improvement from Israel in allowing the aid to enter into Gaza. But these reports certainly contradict these statements and narratives of the State Department and Israeli army. And the biggest concern is that since the change in regime in United States, will Mr. Trump do anything much more concrete? Because it appears now that the kind of bonhomie Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu enjoys with Trump, he will now go unhinged for more attacks, for more annexation, because the US, newly appointed US ambassador to Israel and a lot of other officials who are concerned with Middle East in the US, in the new administration, have always advocated for more annexation of land, leading to more conflict.
All right, Ghazali, thanks very much for joining us with that perspective there. As Ghazali is reporting, what is critical now is to be seen whether the West accepts this report on Israeli war crimes or not. But moving now to how the Trump administration is taking shape. Well, Donald Trump is continuing with his whimsical picks. In fact, he's set to return to the White House after the stunning victory, and he's appointed anti-vaccine activist Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as his Secretary of the Health Department. Remember, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is a former independent presidential candidate who has a history of spreading conspiracy theories, including about vaccines. Meanwhile, Elon Musk, the world's wealthiest person and, of course, a close ally of President-elect Donald Trump, met with Iran's ambassador to the United Nations on Monday. This is what the New York Times has reported. The meeting between Musk and Iran's envoy was held at a secret location in New York and lasted more than an hour. This is what the NYT has reported, citing Iranian officials who reportedly described the discussion as focused on how to diffuse tensions between the two countries. Trump has, of course, vowed ending the two wars. And moving now to our big focus of the World 24/7 this morning. Well, Climate Action Tracker has said that there has been a 3-year standstill in global warming projections with no improvement since 2021. An absolutely startling report. In fact, based on the aggregate effect of current climate policies, the world is on a path toward 2.7 degrees Celsius of warming. This is what the report has said. In fact, CAT said that 2024 has been marked by minimal overall progress on the global warming climate crisis. CAT's annual climate report said while Donald Trump's election with impact projected temperature levels due to expected rollbacks of climate change policies, it's uncertain to what extent. But what's absolutely shocking is that there's been no improvement in terms of the global warming levels since 2021. Joining me on the show this morning, well, St. Warren Rose, founding director of NDTV Institute. Thanks very much, Mr. Rose, for being with us. Absolutely startling report there. And my first question to you, there has been this understanding that those who are least responsible for global warming, those who are least responsible for climate change, are the worst affected. And that's something that we've seen only exacerbate perhaps in the past 2 years or so.
That's absolutely right. And it looks like that trend is going to continue, especially with the technologies of artificial intelligence being developed in the United States. Speaking specifically to the issue of, the global temperatures reaching into the 2.7, I think 2.8 is what's now projected. It's not that we're doing a poor job in developing renewables. Overall, if you look at, Portugal, for example, has done a fantastic job. So the problem is that we're continually using more energy every year than the energy use is outpacing the renewable energy production. So that's a basic problem that we have to resolve. And that could easily be resolved with energy efficiency, which is something that we don't prioritize because there's no money in it. There's a lot more money in developing solar and wind and nuclear. But the costs involved in selling a more energy efficient air conditioner, it just doesn't. That's part of the problem, is that energy efficiency is not prioritized.
That's an interesting point you're making. And of course, what you said at the very outset as well, there's a great deal of inequity perhaps that marks our climate policies. But looking at the geopolitical reality, 2024 is perhaps the biggest election year globally. New governments are rising. The geopolitical reality is changing with new leaders, of course, taking over. Donald Trump's election, of course, we saw he spoke of the climate agreement there as well. How do you see all of this impacting, the world strategy vis-a-vis climate change?
I'm not optimistic. The fact that we have in the United States, speaking from that perspective, the most powerful and largest energy user per capita, per person, we don't have a cabinet position that speaks directly to climate change. And yet we have other cabinet positions in energy and defense and that sort of thing. If you look at the cost in energy of things like the Department of Defense in the U.S., the U.S.'s military represents nearly 1% of all energy use globally. So, and then if you look at what's going on around the world, look at the war between Ukraine and the Soviet Union. The carbon emissions of that war, people don't think about it from that perspective. There's a terrible human cost, but there's also a cost in the carbon emissions. And Mumbai, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, if you compare the carbon emissions of the entire city of Mumbai to the war, the entire city of Mumbai uses about 25% of the carbon emissions of the war between Ukraine and the Soviet Union. So we want to solve this problem. We have to solve global problems, which have been going on for as long as humans have been on this planet. We need to stop war. War is a huge cost, and think of all the people that are fighting around the world and all of these conflicts. If we were using that energy and that money and that ingenuity and the technology to solve climate change instead of grabbing territory, maybe we could resolve it. But I'm not optimistic, and it doesn't seem like we're moving in that direction.
Absolutely shocking there, in fact, that analogy you made there also, and the environmental cost of war. I think that's something that we must look at. Thanks very much, Mr. Rose, for joining us with your perspective there. Absolutely shocking there. No improvement whatsoever as far as global warming action is concerned since 2021. But this as activists staged huge protests as the UN climate talks begin at Baku. In fact, climate activists sent a very direct message to the COP leaders. They said we need to pay up. In fact, they demand the richer countries to pay up as well. This has been something that's been much talked about, how the global south continues to suffer for actions that are not of its doing. In fact, rich nations are behind the most greenhouse gas emissions as well. And there you can see those visuals of climate activists staging those protests as well. Moving now to a video that has gone absolutely viral on social media. Well, an absolutely ingenious form of protest in the New Zealand Parliament. The Maori protest paused the New Zealand's Parliament. This amid debate over race relations law. The race law is set to redefine the nation's founding agreement. The founding agreement vowed to land rights to the Maori tribe, and the new bill is set to specify land rights that should apply to all. The vote was suspended. In fact, 2 lawmakers were ejected also after the protest. In other news now, days after Khalistani terrorist Arshdeep Singh Gill, alias Arshdeep Dalla, was arrested in Canada, India's Ministry of External Affairs has said that the agencies will be following up on an extradition request. Given Dalla's criminal record in India and his involvement in similar illegal activities in Canada, it is expected that he will be extradited or deported to face justice in India. So, of course, this is, remember, an extremely contentious case. He's been booked for various murder cases here as well. And the Ministry of External Affairs also specifying that the investigating agencies will follow up on the extradition request. In fact, this also comes amid the diplomatic row between India and Canada. India continues to sort of double down on its stand that there's zero tolerance as far as extremism is concerned, as far as Canada shielding terrorists and shielding extremists is concerned. And it's, of course, in that backdrop that Dalla was also arrested by the Canadian police, and now the extradition is only going to be expedited, something that the Ministry of External Affairs had pointed out earlier as well. And now the Prime Minister's crucial diplomatic visit to Africa and Latin America. He's all set to embark on that 3-nation trip from November the 17th. He's set to visit crucial countries like Guyana, also Nigeria, Brazil. This is the Prime Minister's first visit to Nigeria. In fact, it's historic in the sense that this is the first visit to Nigeria by an Indian Prime Minister in almost 17 years. He's also set to visit Brazil after Nigeria for G20. And of course, Guyana, which is home to a large Indian diaspora as well. And that diaspora connect has been something that has become a defining theme of the Prime Minister's diplomacy as well. That will take a short break now, but a lot more news and updates on the other side. Welcome back. The European Union's crackdown on Meta continues, with regulators having fined Meta with a penalty of nearly 800 million euros for what they call abusive practices involving its marketplace online classified ads business. And remember, the European Commission issued the 797.72 million euro penalty after its long-running investigation found that the company abused its dominant position and engaged in anti-competitive behavior. This is the first time, the EU has imposed a fine on the social media giant for breaches of the blog's competition law. In fact, Meta's tech rivals Google and Apple have previously been slapped with billions in antitrust penalties as well. In other news, the FTC is reportedly readying an investigation into whether Microsoft used anti-competitive tactics to maintain a dominant position in the cloud market. Well, according to the Financial Times, the agency is looking into allegations that Microsoft imposed punitive licensing agreements to prevent customers from moving data off its platforms. In fact, sources told FT that the FTC is also investigating claims that Microsoft hiked subscription fees for customers who wanted to leave, made its products incompatible with rivals, and charged steep exit fees as well. Meanwhile, strong winds and torrential rain have battered the Philippines as Super Typhoon Usagi arrived. More than 24,000 have been, of course, evacuated in northeastern Philippines as well. Look at those dramatic visuals coming in there from the Philippines. Thousands have been evacuated, particularly from low-lying areas, and the impact is going to be severe as well. Meanwhile, Spain is bracing for more storms after flash floods. In fact, heavy rain is expected in Spain's Valencia region. Rainstorms in Spain threaten to overflow rivers as well. In fact, the new storms have caused school closures. Schools have been closed across Spain. Multiple trains have been delayed and cancelled also. Remember, in the flash floods, over 200 people were killed and thousands lost their homes as well. The impact was absolutely catastrophic there, as you can see in those pictures, and now Spain bracing for a severe storm as well. Meanwhile, in other news, the skiing legend has now announced that he will come out of retirement. In fact, the three-time Olympic medalist is all set to return after 5 years. What a comeback it will be. Remember, Won has announced to return after a successful knee injury as well. She said that the retirement was harder than I expected it would be. All right, that's all the time that we have on the World 24/7. Thanks so much for watching. Goodbye.